Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to Australia once again, and we're going to have a look at a beer from another brewery that I've never tried anything from before. So these guys are yet another relatively new addition to the Australian beer scene. In that short lifetime though, they've built a very good reputation for themselves. They've been very experimental and brewed lots of different kinds of beer as far as I can gather. And, you know, for me, it's very cool to be able to review some Australian beer for you for the first time in a long time. It was 2015 that I was last in Australia, and the beer scene was very much in its infancy at that point. But there's lots of new breweries popping up, and it's very cool to see. So hopefully I can get back to Australia and try some more of those beers at some point soon. But this brewery is supposed to be very good. The beer itself is a very highly rated one. It's a style that I very much enjoy, and it has a kind of uniquely Australian twist to it as well, which is one of the reasons that this one caught my eye. So needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good one. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to Melbourne in Victoria in the southeastern part of Australia. To be specific, we're going to go to the Bayside area and Mordialloc, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I really hope that I am. But that means that we're going to have a look at my first beer from Wolf of the Willows. So this particular beer is called Persistence 3. It comes in at 12% ABV, and this is a rye whiskey barrel aged Imperial Stout. So yeah, the rye whiskey barrels used in this one are from the Gospel, who are apparently Australia's only rye whiskey specialised distillery, and that was the main reason that this one kind of caught my eye. But yeah, we've had a couple of Australian brews here on the channel over the last little while, and I thought this would be a really nice one to kind of round off with. But yeah, we've covered a couple of different states, you know, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. It's just a shame we couldn't get something from you know, Tasmania, WA, South Australia and the Northern Territories and stuff. But yeah, it was really nice just to review some new Australian breweries for you here on the channel, and I thought this would be a really cool way to finish off. So yeah, very highly rated beer, like I said. I've not reviewed too many rye whiskey barrel aged Imperial Stouts on the channel, and this is most definitely the first one I've had from Australia. I haven't reviewed too many Australian Imperial Stouts, if memory serves me correctly. But yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see how we go on. A 12% rye whiskey barrel aged Imperial Stout from Wolf of the Willows Brewery in Mordialloc, the Bayside area, Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, however, you can just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website and the link to my future reviews that hopefully I can do from Wolf of the Willows. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned, but hopefully not the last time. There's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support that you give is massively appreciated. And remember, you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer using the geography tagging system. So just go into the homepage, use the search bar, put your hometown, state, county, prefecture, whatever you like in there. If I review beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Australian playlist along with a number of other things, and hopefully we can add to that playlist a little bit more regularly going forward. But Australian beer, for me living in Sweden, is a little bit difficult to come across. I got quite lucky being here in Osaka in Japan, so yeah, we'll see how that goes going forward. But let's go on to my brewery notes then, and I'll tell you a little bit about Wolf of the Willows for the first time. So, Wolf of the Willows, as I mentioned already, are based in Mordialloc in the Bayside area of southeastern Melbourne and Victoria in the southeast of Australia, and the company was founded back in 2014 by husband and wife team Scott and Renee McKinnon. So Scott was apparently introduced to craft beer by his dad, who used to homebrew, but it was a snowboarding trip to Colorado and a visit to New Belgium brewery that made him fall in love with the more modern iteration of craft breweries apparently. But when he went back to Australia, he worked in digital marketing, but he homebrewed in his spare time. So Renee, though, worked in the hospitality industry, and at one point she was working for a wine distributor, and it was the combination of experiences that they both had with homebrewing and the knowledge of the alcohol industry that really prompted them to start up their business and move into the craft beer industry. So they originally brewed in a space in Cheltenham in Melbourne that they shared with Bad Shepherd Brewing Company, and they released their first beer, which was called the XPA, and then continued to develop new recipes and increase their distribution over the following years. But by mid-2018 they hit their production capacity and they really needed to expand, so they started searching for a new premises. But in 2019 they moved to their current home in Mordialloc, which is equipped with a 12 hectolitre brew kit, so 1,200 litres, and this site also has an on-site tap room which has 12 taps, and this opened to the public in 2020. But the location is known as Home of the Wolf. It's quite distinctive as well because they have a 9 metre tall 32 tonne grain silo outside, and this is made up to look like a beer can, so it's known as the Big Tinny, and it's just a very distinctive landmark. So this is something that I guess I need to go and see the next time I make it down to Melbourne. But in 2021 they launched their Aqua Boogie brand of alcoholic seltzers, and these very quickly to be a large portion of the brewery's sales. I think the article that I read said they were somewhere in the region of 18% of their sales. So yeah, that's pretty damn impressive. You know, seltzers are growing all over the place. But as of April 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 95 different kinds of beer according to Untappd. That will no doubt rise as time goes on, but like I say, a very well-respected brewery these days in the Melbourne beer scene from what I understand. And when I was in Australia back in 2015, Victoria was one of the big craft beer states. It was really WA and Victoria that were kind of leading the way, but it seems the other states have kind of caught up a little bit now. But yeah, that is everything I can really tell you about Wolf of the Willows Brewery for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys though, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer and Untappd pages to learn a little bit more about all of the different beers that they've done. Unfortunately I couldn't find out why they called themselves Wolf of the Willows, so hopefully we can find that out and talk about that in a future review, or I can go down to the tap room at some point in Melbourne and do an out and about video. That would be pretty awesome, I have to say. But yeah, you've got all the links there, you guys can check that out. I think it is about time that we have a little look at the beer itself and see what it's all about. So yeah, this beer is a 440ml can. You can see the artwork on this one is pretty nice. I think I'll need to keep the can after we film this review, but there you can see Persistence 3 and then Wolf of the Willows at the top. This is a beer that I bought at craft beer based Mother Tree in Umeda in Osaka here in Japan. It was a little bit more expensive, this one. This was about 2,100 yen if I remember correctly, so that translates to maybe about 15 euros, something like that. So that'll be about 150 Swedish kroner, maybe about 16 or 17 American dollars, and maybe about £12 sterling, something like that. So for an Imperial Stout, those prices for me aren't too bad. I live in South Sweden, so alcohol is a little bit more expensive, very close to Copenhagen as well, where it's even more expensive. So yeah, the price of this one for me wasn't too bad because the Japanese yen is a little bit weak at the moment. You were filming this in April 2023, of course. So yeah, this just kind of caught my eye because it was something a little bit big, bold and kind of special. But like we said earlier, this beer, the barrels that they've used to age this one are from the Gospel, which is Australia's only rye whisky specialised distillery, and it tells you a wee bit about the beer on the side here. So it says, persistence, to continue in spite of opposition, frustration or fatigue. Symbolic of our time, rye grain continues to grow even in the harshest of conditions. Just like the challenge of a maze, we all like to take different paths. We all hit dead ends, but with persistence we all grow and come out the other side, much like rye does. This is the third year in which we brewed a very special rye Imperial Stout and then aged it in the hand-selected rye whisky Solera barrels from the Gospel Distillery. The result is an Imperial Stout rich in rye whisky barrel-aged flavours of molasses, dark chocolate, cherry, licorice and espresso. Hashtag Barrel Exchange Project, family owned and operated since 2014. So yeah, kind of interesting, I have to say. So a little bit more of an expensive beer. You can feel the density in the can of this one as well, I have to say. But like we said earlier, a 12% rye whisky barrel aged Imperial Stout. And yeah, and they just said, the other note that I had on this one was that it was brewed with a very high proportion of rye malt. But yeah, I think we have everything we need from the brewery notes. We can open this one up and have a little look at it. I'll just let you have a wee look at the Wolf of the Willows thing there on the side there as well. But yeah, lovely artwork on this one. You can see the Persistence 3 thing there as well, black top on the can as I showed you earlier. But yeah, I think I need to go and have a little look at their tap room at some point, the home of the wolf, as they call it apparently. But yeah, we'll get this guy out into the glass and see what it's all about. This should be pretty awesome. Tell you something, you can smell the whiskey on this as you open it up. Now, as a Scot, I have to say I'm not overly familiar with rye whiskey. I've not tried, rye whiskey is more of an American thing in my experience, and I haven't tried too many bourbons because in Scotland you just kind of don't need to. You just don't really have a need to look at bourbons because we've got so many good whiskies of our own. But I've tried a lot of Japanese whiskies, some Taiwanese, Indian, South Korean and things like that, and they always tend to be pretty good. So rye whiskey is something that I definitely need to explore a little bit more. So we'll see about that going forward. But anyway, you can see that we've poured this beer now, and it looks pretty much as you would expect from any Imperial Stout. Now, there's not too much in the way of a head on this one. You can see that it just has a nice kind of, I would say, very light fawn coloured ring around the edge of the glass. There's a few little wispy bits in the top there, and you can see one or two bubbles just coming toward the surface of the beer as well. But one or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, like we said, a few little ones going up toward the surface of the liquid there. But overall, it looks very nice. If we shine the light through this beer, we can see that it's definitely a dark ebony rosewood colour. I don't think there was ever any doubt about that. But it does have a little bit of a kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi or whatever coloured edge to it. It certainly looks very nice. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar is caramelised and thus you get a darker colour beer. But any barrel aging they do or adjuncts you put into the beer can affect it as well. But when it comes to black beers like this, like Imperial Stouts, it's actually very hard to change the colour of the beer just by barrel aging or adjuncts. I've only ever seen it done with Beats, and that was a beer from Puasta in Tartu in Estonia, if memory serves me correctly. Other than that, I've never seen an Imperial Stout that's really been affected colour-wise by what barrel it's been aged in. But yeah, lovely looking Imperial Stout, this one. I don't think there's anything else we really need to say about the appearance of this beer. So we can take a look at the aroma now and just see what it's all about. I'm very, very curious to see what this beer has in store for us. Oh yeah, I'm going to say straight away, this one smells like it's going to be an absolute monster. And you know, when I paid that much for it, I do expect that, to be honest. I'm not going to lie. But yeah, it smells absolutely lovely. Yeah, so really nicely balanced, this one. You've got a nice combination of roastiness in there. You've got a good little bit of woodiness and spirit like you want from a barrel aged Imperial Stout. A little bit of sweet fruity character, a little bit of hoppiness as well. Yeah, this is a pretty damn nice smelling beer actually. So yeah, let's try and break that aroma down for you and just describe it a wee bit more in depth before we taste the thing. Yeah, so for me, the backbone of the beer, you can smell that lovely kind of oaky character coming out of this one. So you've got a lovely, it's interesting for me. I honestly don't know how much oak, Australian oak, you're going to get, because you know Victoria and Tasmania, I'm sure, would have the right climate for oak to grow, as well as parts of South Australia and WA, of course. But yeah, I really don't know how much in the way of Australian oak you get. I often talk on the channel with barrel aged beers about the differences between European oak and American oak. And for me, the European oak is always a little bit drier, whereas the American oak is a little bit smoother. This one kind of smells somewhere in between, so I do wonder if the barrels that Gospel are using are Australian oak. I'd be very curious to know that. But that's a little bit of a tangent. But for me, you can smell this lovely, smooth, oaky character in the base of the beer. Like I say, somewhere between the European dry oak and the American smooth oak. But then on top of that, you can smell the rye whiskey, the kind of rye bourbon or whatever it would be. yeah, obviously there's technical differences between bourbon and whiskey. They call it rye whiskey, so we'll go with that terminology. But yeah, you can definitely smell that's above the wood. There's a little touch of vanilla in there and a little bit of nuttiness and things like that. But above that, you can absolutely smell that rye whiskey spirit coming out of this this beer for sure. But then above that, you get the elements from the actual malts in the beer itself. So let's have a wee look at those and just see what we get. So the backbone of this beer for me, you absolutely do get a little bit of that roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust in there. But there's also a good little bit of like a dry cocoa nibby chocolate, and that is also very nice with this one. So yeah, a little bit of, you've got the well-fired bread crust and the dark cocoa nibby chocolate, but above the well-fired bread crust, you certainly get a little bit of like a rye bready character out of this one. And for me, rye bread has always been a little bit sweeter. I love a good little bit of rye bread. So yeah, the slightly more roasty, toasty, well-fired rye bread crust, then the thicker and slightly sweeter rye bread layer. Definitely a layer of wholemeal brown bread in this one as well, in my opinion. And then above that, there's a little bit of a kind of white bready character, I think, which is kind of interesting. I do get just a little hint of white bread in there. But then, yeah, you've got the cocoa nibby character that I was talking about, and a blend of different chocolates. For me, the chocolatey character that I'm picking out of the aroma here is maybe a sort of 60, 70, 80% cocoa chocolate. It's got a good, it doesn't smell too dark, but it certainly has got a little bit of a higher percentage cocoa to it. And like I say, there's a little bit of that drier cocoa nibby type quality to the beer as well. But above that, you're starting to get some of the kind of brown sugary notes out of the beer. So for me, the brown sugary notes, there's a little bit of that kind of leathery character to the beer, which would normally indicate a longer wort boil. Again, the longer you boil the wort in beers, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a kind of more leathery brown sugary note. So there is a wee bit of leatheriness to this one. And for me, the brown sugars, above that, there's a little bit of a treacle molasses kind of note. There is a bit of a straight up sweet caramel in there, and a wee bit of toasty brown sugar as well. So a lot of the complexity with this beer is in the middle of the nose with this one, and I'm sure that will translate to the middle of the palate when we actually taste the beer as well. But yeah, a lovely blend. It smells to me very much like a kind of old school Russian Imperial Stout with a wee bit more rye and bready character in it, but also the woody character in this one for me is quite interesting, because it's not quite European oak, it's not American oak. Maybe they're using Australian oak for the barrels at Gospel, which would be quite unique and quite unusual. So like I said at the start of the video, a little bit of an Australian twist to this one for sure. Yeah, I think that covers the malty and kind of yeasty side of the beer. I don't think there's too much to really say on the yeasty side that isn't really included in what we said with the malt. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, for me, there's a little bit of, there's absolutely a little bit of kind of earthy character to this one. I do get little hints of kind of floral and grassy notes coming out of the beer too. Yeah, there is a little bit of hoppy character to this one. You know, Imperial Stouts are not the most hop forward of beer styles, but quite often you will still get a little bit of that there. So a wee bit of earthiness, a little bit of floral character, and a wee bit of wet grassiness, but beyond that, you've got a lot of nice kind of fruity character coming out of this one. So for me, I don't know if I would go quite as far as raisins for this one, because it just doesn't feel quite sharp enough to be raisins. But there's a lovely kind of, yeah, there's a lovely kind of oily, plummy character coming out of this one. Yeah, so sharp, a teeny little bit of raisin, oily plums in there, nice juicy figs definitely, and a lot of blackcurrant and blackberry. To be honest, the fruity character to this beer is kind of what you would expect from this type of beer, but it's still very, very nice actually. Can't knock it at all. Just beautiful, beautiful smelling beer. So yeah, you can smell the slight difference with the kind of woody barrel in this one. And like I say, the woody character for me is a little bit different, but I've not had too many rye whiskey barrel aged Imperial Stouts. So yeah, this will be a nice treat for sure, I have to say. So as I always say, take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. But yeah, I think it is about time for us to try this one. Yeah, this is the Persistence 3 from Wolf of the Willows in Mordialloc in the Bayside area of southeastern Melbourne and Victoria in Australia. A rye whisky barrel aged Imperial Stout at 12% ABV using barrels from the Gospel, Australia's only specialised rye whisky distillery. So yeah, let's do this. Let's see what this beer is all about. Slàinte, skål, cheers. This will probably be the last Australian review you'll see for a couple of months, but very nice place to round off. Let's get stuck in. Slàinte. Oh yeah. That's a lovely, lovely beer. Yeah, first impression of this one. Let's just say that this is a proper old school Russian Imperial Stout. No doubt in my mind about that. It's a proper old school Russian Imperial Stout. Does have that good little bit of rye malt to it in fairness though. And then yeah, you've got the nice rye whiskey barrels behind that. But yeah, it's basically a proper old school Russian Imperial Stout that's slightly more rye leaning in my mind. But yeah, really great stuff. Big thumbs up to Wolf of the Willows for this. I'll need to try a few more different styles of beer from these guys at some point in the future, but we'll need to see when we can make that happen. But anyway, let's focus on this beer and just kind of break it down for you. That's my first impression of this, like I say, old school Russian Imperial Stout. So yeah, let's try this. I tell you something too, it's got a lovely smooth mouthfeel to it, and one of the things with barrel aged beers that you always have to remember is that you do tend to sacrifice a little bit of the mouthfeel in these beers when you barrel age them. So something you have to factor in when you're actually designing the recipe and so on. But this one for me is really different to what I've had from a number of beers. Like that. As I say, I'm not overly familiar with rye whiskey barrel aging, but I certainly do like it. Cognac barrel aging though is probably my favourite at the moment, but you know, it goes in phases. Sometimes you really enjoy a bourbon barrel aged Imperial Stout, sometimes you like cognac. But yeah, rye whiskey is one that I'm not overly familiar with. So yeah, let's just break this beer down and describe it for you a wee bit more in depth. We'll start with the middle third of the palate as we always do. So for me, the woody character in this beer and the flavour is kind of similar to what I was picking up in the aroma. So you've got that lovely, smooth, oaky backbone to the beer. It has got a wee bit of dryness to it, but likewise it's got a wee bit of smoothness. And further back on that middle third of the palate, you've got the kind of dryness there. But yeah, as you move further forward, it gradually gives you a wee bit more. Yeah, it gradually gives you a little bit more of kind of smoothness actually. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that there's a little touch of vanilla in there, and then above the woody layer you start to get a wee bit of the rye whiskey spirit. So yeah, this is very, very nice. And I will say as well, this beer, it does actually feel quite boozy, although it could just be that I've not had an Imperial Stout in a wee while actually. But yeah, you can certainly feel that this beer is 12%. It's giving you a wee bit of warmth in the chest and things like that, but still not going to complain about that. I've not had an Aussie Imperial Stout in a very long time, and this is certainly going down a treat, I have to say. Yeah, so above the kind of the rye whiskey layer that you get, you really can feel a little bit of the spirit coming out of this one the further into the aftertaste you go. But above, in that middle third of the palate, above the spirit, you get a nice little toasty rye bready bread crust. On top of that, you get a slightly lighter and more airy rye bread, and then you get a layer of like wholemeal brown bread as well. So it's a very layered flavour that you're getting in this beer. There are one or two little nutty elements that kind of push their way out of the kind of wholemeal brown bready layer, and then above that you have a little bit more chocolate and brown sugar and stuff like that. But like I say, for me, this beer really is like an old school Russian Imperial Stout. If you could tell me that it wasn't barrel aged or anything like that, and I could believe you on that. The barrel aging side of this beer is quite subtle compared to a lot of other ones that I've come across. But yeah, above the bready layer in this one, that's when you start to get the kind of chocolatey side of the beer. So further back on the palate, in that middle third again, you can feel there's quite like a roasty, well-fired chocolate. But as you move further forward, it mellows out and goes toward almost milky chocolate, but not quite. I think at the back of that middle third of the palate, you're starting at maybe 90% cocoa chocolate, but as you move further forward, you're maybe reaching 70% cocoa chocolate, but 60 at the absolute max. Like I say, it mellows out, but yeah, quite a dark chocolatey character coming out of this beer. Yeah. So for me, above the kind of roasty chocolate and the slightly sweeter chocolate that comes out further forward, you start to get the brown sugars out of the beer. So for me, there's a little bit of a leathery brown sugar, and normally a leathery brown sugar would indicate a slightly longer wort boil, but I don't feel too much of that in this one. And I don't feel that this beer is double mash either, but again, you have to remember that with barrel aging, you will sacrifice a little bit of the mouthfeel in the beer. But yeah, in any case, above the kind of chocolatey layer, you can feel there's a very thin layer of like a leathery brown sugar, and then above that you've got the other brown sugars coming out of the beer. So in the dead centre of your palate, you can feel there's like a really concentrated treacle molasses sort of thing, and then underneath that like a roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crusty character as well. So yeah, it's quite, in some ways, this is quite a straightforward Imperial Stout, this one, but like definitely really a lot of RIS vibes to this beer, like old school RIS just on rye whiskey barrels. But I think we've covered everything we need to say about the middle third of your palate in this beer. Just the only other thing would be like a little bit the further into the aftertaste you go with this one, you get more and more roastiness coming out of this beer. The bitterness in this beer does actually build quite a little bit. But let's focus on that back third of the palate then. So base of the back third of the beer is similar to what we picked up in the middle third of the palate. You've got that woody character in there, and it's a little bit drier and things. And as I've always said, quite often what you'll find is that sweeter and more oily flavours come out further forward on the palate, drier and more bitter flavours come out further back. So the woody character you have in the base of the beer is a little bit drier. You've got the spirit above that as well, which again is a little bit drier. Well-fired rye bread crust, which is drier and more bitter. Then you've got the rye bready layer, which is a little bit taller and more airy. The wholemeal brown bready layer, which is a little bit more tall and airy. And above that, you start to get a bit more of a kind of yeasty, farmhousey bready character. So yeah, like quite a farmhousey brown bready note coming out of this beer for me. And there's maybe just a little touch of honeycomb and stuff like that in there. I often tend to get honeycomb on the back third of the palate with the yeasty side of the flavour. So yeah, definitely back third of the palate, you can feel the flavour is taller. Then as you come further forward into the middle third of the palate, it just kind of condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. So yeah, interesting stuff, I have to say. Yeah. I think that's everything we need to say about the malty and yeasty side of the beer. So we'll go on to the hoppy side of things now. And we'll have to remember, Imperial Stouts are not the most hop-forward style of beer. But in the back corners of the palate, there's definitely a little bit of earthiness in there. And again, that builds up the further into the aftertaste you go. But as you move further forward, it gets a little bit more herbal. And as you reach the kind of front corners of the palate, it's got a little bit more of a kind of floral aromatic sort of thing to it. Just a little touch of spice. And then round the front curve of the tongue, it's a wee bit lighter and more grassy. But like I say, the hoppy bitterness in this beer is not overly much actually, but still really nicely done. and it, you know, having a little bit of that hoppy bitterness in there builds a good bridge with the backbone of the beer. But let's have a wee look at the front third of the palate and the fruity side of things then. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, you get a little bit of a bready build up in there. It's a little bit well fired. It's got a little bit of a well fired kind of bread crusty note to it, but at the end of the day, I think it is more of a slightly sweeter and drier rye bread. But the base of the front third of the palate, you've got the woodiness in there, you've got the spirit and the bread crust, and then above that you get the nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So let's kind of look at those fruity notes. Yeah, for me, the fruity notes are, again, kind of what you would expect of this one. So, to be honest, that border region between front third and middle third of your palate, the more that I drink of that, the more that it gets kind of, the more that it gets sort of a kind of cakey, phenolic type note to it. So yeah, you have this little bit of a kind of boozy, Christmas puddingy type note at the back of that front third of the palate, just in that border region there, and then the fruity notes come out on top of that. When you take the beer in, you'll find you get a little bit of a raisiny sharpness out of it. So yeah, on the back half of that front third of your palate, there's a little bit of raisiny sharpness. Underneath that, you get a nice kind of juicy plum for sure, then a bit of a drier prune, and I think that forms the back of that front third of your palate. But as you move further forward, nice juicy kind of figgy elements coming out of the beer, and when you move into the front half of that front third of your palate, it's got a lovely black curranty note to it and some big juicy black berries. So yeah, the way that all goes together, I think, is really nice. It's the fruity side of this beer is kind of quite typical of what you would expect of an old school Russian Imperial Stout, but the rye whiskey barrel aging in this one is what makes it quite unique. Like, it's quite a dry whiskey note to this one. I get a lot more dryness out of the wood, and the rye whiskey itself feels quite unique in terms of its flavour. But yeah, this beer really leans toward Russian Imperial Stout for me. So a big, bitter, roasty, toasty Imperial Stout, this one. And it's nice to see that. You know, there's a lot of pastry stouts out there these days, and they can be good to an extent, but to have something that's a little bit more old school like this is a very nice change of pace for me at this point on the channel, and I think Wolf of the Willows have done a very good job of this. So certainly, I wouldn't hesitate to drink another Imperial Stout from these guys, and this beer has me sufficiently curious to try more different styles from them. But yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. In terms of the flavour, we can round off the review with a little look at the mouthfeel. So mouthfeel wise, for me, it's actually very smooth, and it's got an almost slightly slick Imperial Stout, this one. So I think this is kind of at the bottom end of full bodied for me, certainly not the thickest of Imperial Stouts. Like I said though, with barrel aged Imperial Stouts, you always sacrifice a bit of the mouthfeel to get these nice infused flavours. So I would go for bottom end of full bodied, smooth carbonation, quite a lot of dryness to this beer and quite a high bitterness to it as well. For me, I would not be surprised if the IBU count in this beer was 80 or 90, and some of that's from the roasty malty character, but there is a little bit of the kind of hoppy side of this beer, giving you some bitterness and things as well. But overall, yeah, it's quite a dry, roasty, toasty beer, this one. That's giving you at least 80, 90 IBUs. The malt base, like we said, has a bit of dryness underneath, a bit of roastiness in the middle, some sweetness there. But yeah, like I say, it's an old school Russian Imperial Stout, this one. The fruity side of the beer is very nice too. A little bit of sharpness in the beginning, but juiciness later on. But absolutely, it's all about the kind of black currants and berries and stuff like that. So yeah, really interesting beer, this one. Like I say, not many rye whiskey barrel aged beers here on the channel. So I think rye whiskey, barrel aged Imperial Stouts and barley wines and stuff like that are things that I need to explore a little bit more. But a lovely, lovely beer, and I think this is a nice way to kind of round off the Australian mini-series that I've been doing for you over the last couple of weeks. So yeah, it's 5 new Australian breweries that I've introduced for you here on the channel over the last wee while. So yeah, once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Wolf of the Willows as well. This one, just a lovely old school, roasty, toasty and fruity Russian Imperial Stout. This 12% ABV, persistence 3, rye whiskey barrel aged. Great stuff. So yeah, need to try a few different styles from these guys going forward. But again, thank you for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Wolf of the Willows as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys again at some point in the near future. This was the Persistence 3, a 12% rye whiskey barrel aged Imperial Stout from Wolf of the Willows in Mordialloc in the Bayside area of Melbourne in Victoria in southeastern Australia. Again, thank you for watching. See you guys in the next review. Slàinte, skull, cheers. See you very soon. I apologise, quite tired when I'm filming this one, but until next time.